And then there was Noah. He didn't fit their expectations of anything. I heard it in pieces first, comments in the kitchen, murmurs near the doorway when they saw him come in with me. His thrifted clothes, his uneven haircut, the way he stood slightly behind me like he wasn't sure how much space he was allowed to take up. "Is that the boy staying over again?" one aunt asked, voice lowering like she was trying not to be overheard but not really trying hard enough. "That's him," someone else replied. Their gossip intensified, making Noah more uncomfortable. Then quieter, "He doesn't look like he belongs here." "He's very plain," another voice added like they were being generous. I remember my uncle leaning slightly toward another relative, nodding toward the hallway where Noah had gone to put his bag away. "Where did he come from again?" "No one really knows," someone said, "just a school friend, I think." A faint disapproving laugh followed. "School friend, right." They didn't say it loudly, not in front of him, but they didn't have to. The tone carried itself. When Noah came back into the room, I noticed the shift immediately. The way his shoulders pulled in a fraction tighter. The way his eyes flicked briefly toward the voices in the other room before settling somewhere safer on the floor, on the edge of the bed, anywhere but directly on them. He wasn't stupid. He could feel it. I moved closer to him without thinking, as I could physically block the atmosphere from reaching him. "Hey," I said quietly. "I heard them," he admitted. I frowned. "They don't matter." He gave a small shrug like he didn't fully believe that but didn't want to argue either. "They're your family." "Yeah," I said, "and?" He didn't answer that. That night when we finally got ready to sleep, I noticed the sleeping bag still sitting folded in the corner, unused, tucked away like something he didn't know what to do with anymore. I gestured toward the bed. "You're not using that." He hesitated again. "They'll think it's weird if I just get in." I snorted softly. "They already think everything is weird." That earned a small, reluctant smile from him. Still, he lingered at the edge of the mattress like he was waiting for permission from a room that wasn't going to give it. So I shifted closer and patted the space beside me again. "Come here," I said. This time he did. Later, I remember overhearing more of the conversation from outside the room, voices lowered, thinking we were asleep. "It's strange," one relative said, "the way he insists on keeping that boy so close." "Charity cases can become attachments," another replied. "It's not always healthy." "He should be careful," someone added. "People like that don't usually stay in their place." There was a pause, then a quieter voice. "He's going to learn that eventually." I remember feeling something tighten in my chest listening to that. Not fear exactly, more like irritation, cold and steady. Because what they saw as not staying in his place, I just saw as Noah existing the way he always did, close, quiet, unguarded, sitting beside me like it made sense, breathing like he wasn't trying to earn the right to do it, and I didn't understand why that bothered them so much. I remember the sound of footsteps rushing back, Noah leading her, pulling her by instinct more than direction. My mother came into the room immediately, her presence changing the air the way an adult's does when something serious is happening. "Noah, turn the light on brighter," she said calmly but firmly, already taking control of the situation. "I did," he said quickly, hovering near the bed, not knowing where to put his hands. He just started shaking and I didn't know he wouldn't answer me. "It's okay," she said, kneeling beside me. "You did well, stay here." Noah didn't move away. He stayed right there, eyes locked on me like he was afraid I would disappear if he looked anywhere else. My mother's voice became steadier, grounded, repeating instructions I didn't fully understand even then. "Breathe, it's okay, just breathe through it." I remember fragments of it, the sound of her counting softly, the way her hand pressed gently but firmly near my shoulder to keep me safe, the way she spoke like she wasn't afraid even though everything was clearly urgent. And through all of it, Noah stayed, not speaking loudly anymore, just watching. Then carefully, hesitantly he reached out, his hand found mine. It was small, warm, and slightly trembling, and the moment he touched me, something changed. Not instantly in a dramatic way, not like everything stopped all at once, but like my body recognized something familiar inside the chaos. Something safe, something steady. The shaking didn't vanish immediately, but it felt less consuming, less violent, like there was suddenly a point of reference I could cling to. Noah leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper now. "I'm here," he said. "It's okay, I'm here." My mother didn't interrupt him, she just continued guiding me through it, her tone even and practiced. "Keep holding his hand if you want," she told him softly after a moment, "but don't pull, just stay calm." Noah nodded quickly, not taking his eyes off me. "Okay." "I don't know what to do," he admitted under his breath, voice breaking slightly. "I didn't know this could happen." "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "You got me, that's exactly what you were supposed to do." "I thought I was hurting him," Noah whispered, scared. "You weren't," she said, "you helped him." That seemed to settle something in him, his grip steadied. His thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles, a small, repetitive motion like he was trying to anchor me in place. "Hey," he said quietly, leaning closer, "don't go anywhere, okay?" I couldn't answer then, not properly, but I remember thinking it, that I wasn't alone in it, that even in the middle of something I couldn't control, Noah was there steady in a way that didn't fix everything but made it less frightening. Later, my mother would explain what had happened in simpler terms. Later, there would be doctors and words I didn't understand yet, but what stayed with me wasn't the medical explanation. It was Noah's hand in mine, warm, present, and the strange, quiet realization that sometimes just having him there made everything feel like it was holding together a little longer than it should have been. Noah used to bring his sleeping bag to sleepovers for the first few months, like he was trying to make himself smaller in my space, easier to pack up and leave if he was ever asked to. It wasn't something he explained directly, but it showed in the way he carried it folded neatly, held close to his chest, like it mattered that he didn't assume he belonged anywhere for too long. The first night I saw it, I remember just staring at it for a second, then I told him to put it away. "I hate sleeping bags," I said more sharply than I intended. He paused mid-fold, looking up at me. "Oh, I can sleep in it on the floor, it's fine." "No," I said, already moving to pat down the mattress beside me with my hand like I was making a decision that didn't need debate. "You're not sleeping over there." He blinked. "Where?" "Here," I said simply like it was obvious, "on the bed." That hesitation came again, small, automatic, like he was checking if he was allowed to accept what was being offered. I didn't like that pause, not even then. "I don't like sleeping bags," I added, softer this time but firmer in meaning. "And you're not sleeping on the floor." He looked down at the sleeping bag, then back at the mattress, then at me. Slowly, he unzipped it again and folded it back up. "Okay," he said quietly. From the hallway that night, I remember hearing the voices of relatives drifting through the house. It was one of those gatherings where people act like they're being polite, but everything they say carries weight underneath it, judgment wrapped in casual conversation. I was apparently the heir, the one everyone expected to carry the family name forward in a way that looked polished and proper. They said it like it was inevitable, like it meant something untouchable. And then there was Noah. He didn't fit their expectations of anything. I heard it in Peace's first comments in the kitchen, murmurs near the doorway when they saw him come in with me. His thrifted clothes, his uneven haircut, the way he stood slightly behind me like he wasn't sure how much space he was allowed to take up. "Is that the boy staying over again?" one aunt asked, voice lowering like she was trying not to be overheard but not really trying hard enough. "That's him," someone else replied. Their gossip intensified, making Noah more uncomfortable. Then quieter, "He doesn't look like he belongs here." "He's very plain," another voice added like they were being generous. I remember my uncle leaning slightly toward another relative, nodding toward the hallway where Noah had gone to put his bag away. "Where did he come from again?" "No one really knows," someone said. "Just a school friend, I think." A faint, disapproving laugh followed. "School friend, right." They didn't say it loudly, not in front of him, but they didn't have to. The tone carried itself. When Noah came back into the room, I noticed the shift immediately. The way his shoulders pulled in a fraction tighter. The way his eyes flicked briefly toward the voices in the other room before settling somewhere safer on the floor, on the edge of the bed, anywhere but directly on them. He wasn't stupid. He could feel it. I moved closer to him without thinking, as I could physically block the atmosphere from reaching him. "Hey," I said quietly. "I heard them," he admitted. I frowned. "They don't matter." He gave a small shrug like he didn't fully believe that but didn't want to argue either. "They're your family." Yeah, I said, and. He didn't answer that. That night, when we finally got ready to sleep, I noticed the sleeping bag still sitting folded in the corner, unused, tucked away like something he didn't know what to do with anymore. I gestured toward the bed. You're not using that. He hesitated again. They'll think it's weird if I just get in. I snorted softly. They already think everything is weird. That earned a small, reluctant smile from him. Still, he lingered at the edge of the mattress like he was waiting for permission from a room that wasn't going to give it. So I shifted closer and patted the space beside me again. Come here, I said. This time he did. Later, I remember overhearing more of the conversation from outside. The room, voices lowered, thinking we were asleep. It's strange, one relative said, the way he insists on keeping that boy so close. Charity cases can become attachments, another replied. It's not always healthy. He should be careful, someone added. People like that don't usually stay in their place. There was a pause, then a quieter voice. He's going to learn that eventually. I remember feeling something tighten in my chest listening to that, not fear exactly, more like irritation, cold and steady. Because what they saw as not staying in his place, I just saw as Noah existing the way he always did, close, quiet, unguarded, sitting beside me like it made sense, breathing like he wasn't trying to earn the right to do it, and I didn't understand why that bothered them so much. When a young Tate turned his body back into the room, Noah was already lying down, curled slightly on the mattress, watching me like he was waiting for the world to decide what kind of night this would be. It's loud out there, he whispered. They'll stop, I said. He nodded but didn't fully relax until I lay down beside him. Only then did his little shoulders drop. Only then did he breathe like he believed he was allowed to stay. And in the dark, with the voices finally fading into the background, he shifted closer, not hesitating this time until there was no space left between what they thought of him and where he actually was. The Blue family, friends and blood relatives noticed the shift before anyone said it out loud. It started with the way Noah was allowed to exist near me. Not behind me, not at a distance, not in the careful, socially acceptable orbit my family expected from someone like him. A poor boy like Noah was supposed to sit to the right of the most important young man in California, the heir to the Blue estate, and yet the penniless little Noah was the Blue heir's most prized possession. I never believed Noah was my possession, not like a car, a television, or even my favorite pair of sneakers. Noah was something entirely different to me. He was precious. I felt responsible for him. I believed it was my duty to protect him financially, socially, and emotionally. In my mind, Noah depended on me, and because I was responsible for him, I sometimes viewed him as an asset. But even then, I never saw him as an inanimate object or as something I literally owned. To me, ownership and responsibility had become intertwined. The things I owned were also things I felt responsible for protecting, maintaining, and caring for. I made the mistake of applying that same framework to Noah. But Noah wasn't something I owned. He was someone I had been entrusted with. I thought of myself as his steward, not his owner. I believed my role was to protect him, provide for him, and make sure he was safe. My possessiveness didn't come from believing Noah was an object without a will of his own. It came from believing that his well-being was partly my responsibility. The problem was that stewardship can become controlling when the person being protected never asked to be managed. I could sincerely believe I was protecting Noah while still making decisions that belonged to him. I could love him deeply and still confuse responsibility with authority. Noah was never my possession. He was a person I loved, a person I felt responsible for, and a person whose trust I had been given. I just had to learn that being entrusted with someone does not mean having the right to control them. Before I brought Noah home when we were both 4 years old, Jay told me something I would never forget. Whatever little boy I brought into my home, I would be responsible for him financially, emotionally, socially, and physically. That responsibility came with a difficult reality. Noah could never know the truth about why he was there. It wasn't because I thought he was inferior, ignorant, or incapable of making his own decisions. It was because he simply didn't have the information necessary to understand the circumstances surrounding his life. Without that information, I believed I had to make certain decisions for him. Not because Noah lacked the capacity to choose, but because he lacked the knowledge required to make an informed choice. If Noah had ever been given the complete truth, I believed my authority to make those decisions would have ended immediately. His choices would have belonged to him. My father Terence had made that danger painfully clear to me when I was only 2 years old. He told me that if anyone ever discovered the truth about my family, that person would die. Those words became part of the foundation of how I understood responsibility. I made decisions for Noah because I believed doing so was necessary to keep him alive and allow him to have the life he wanted. As long as his choices didn't expose our secrets or put either of our lives in danger, Noah was free to make whatever decisions he wanted. I didn't want to control his entire life. I wanted him to have one. There were only a handful of times when I believed Noah was about to make a decision that could seriously endanger himself or expose what we had spent years protecting. Those were the moments when I intervened. In my mind, protecting Noah meant carrying the burden of information he couldn't safely possess. I believed that if I had to make a difficult decision on his behalf, I should be the one to bear the consequences of it. But that responsibility was never supposed to mean that Noah belonged to me. He was a person I had promised to protect. And there is a profound difference between protecting someone's life and owning it. When we were in my home, sitting on the same couches at the same tables, walking the same hallways of the house, proximity itself had stopped being negotiable. My family seeing Noah in that mansion, that was the first disruption in Terence's plans. Before I brought Noah home when we were both 4 years old, Jay told me something I would never forget. Whatever little boy I brought into my home, I would be responsible for him financially, emotionally, socially, and physically. That responsibility came with a difficult reality. Noah could never know the truth about why he was there. It wasn't because I thought he was inferior, ignorant, or incapable of making his own decisions. It was because he simply didn't have the information necessary to understand the circumstances surrounding his life. Without that information, I believed I had to make certain decisions for him. Not because Noah lacked the capacity to choose, but because he lacked the knowledge required to make an informed choice. If Noah had ever been given the complete truth, I believed my authority to make those decisions would have ended immediately. His choices would have belonged to him. My father Terence had made that danger painfully clear to me when I was only 2 years old. He told me that if anyone ever discovered the truth about my family, that person would die. Those words became part of the foundation of how I understood responsibility. I made decisions for Noah because I believed doing so was necessary to keep him alive and allow him to have the life he wanted. As long as his choices didn't expose our secrets or put either of our lives in danger, Noah was free to make whatever decisions he wanted. I didn't want to control his entire life. I wanted him to have one. There were only a handful of times when I believed Noah was about to make a decision that could seriously endanger himself or expose what we had spent years protecting. Those were the moments when I intervened. In my mind, protecting Noah meant carrying the burden of information he couldn't safely possess. I believed that if I had to make a difficult decision on his behalf, I should be the one to bear the consequences of it. But that responsibility was never supposed to mean that Noah belonged to me. He was a person I had promised to protect. And there is a profound difference between protecting someone's life and owning it. He sits too close to Totem, one family friend said under their breath during a gathering, watching from across the room. Another responded without looking up from their drink, "He always does." That's not the point. It never was with them. The Blue family had rules that weren't written anywhere but were enforced in silence. Who belonged where, who stood behind whom, who got to be seen, and who existed only at the edges of a room. Bloodline meant hierarchy. Hierarchy meant distance. And Noah broke that without even trying because I didn't correct it. If anything, I reinforced it. At first it was small things, too small for confrontation, just large enough to be noticed. A seat pulled out for him, a place at the table without hesitation, conversations that didn't skip over him when he spoke. Then it became clothing. The first time Noah wore something expensive from my family's wardrobe, the reaction was immediate. "That doesn't fit him," someone said sharply, not even trying to hide the judgment. "It fits fine," I replied. "It's not about size," they snapped, "it's about They stopped themselves, but everyone knew what they meant: status. Noah stood there quietly, hands slightly tense at his sides, like he was still learning what to do with being looked at instead of overlooked. "I can change it," he said quickly. "No," I said. That was the end of the discussion for me, but not for them, because after that the changes became more visible. A new jacket, a better coat, shoes that didn't look worn down. His hair, once unevenly cut, was suddenly styled properly, subtle at first, then more deliberate, as someone had finally decided he was worth attention instead of neglect. And that was when the tone shifted. "He's being transformed," one aunt said during dinner. "Into what?" someone else asked. "Into something he's not." A pause. Then quieter: "Or something they want him to be." I heard it all, even when they tried to pretend I wasn't listening, especially when they thought I wasn't listening. The Blue relatives had a way of speaking that made everything sound like concern while meaning something far more critical underneath it. "He didn't come from anything," one uncle muttered one evening, watching Noah from across the room, "and now he's dressed as he belongs here." "Belonging is a strong word," someone replied. "He's being placed there," another corrected. That was their favorite theory: placement, as if Noah had been positioned instead of welcomed, as if nothing I did could be genuine. The rumors grew the way they always do in wealthy families: quiet at first, then structured, then fully formed. "He's being elevated. He's being kept close. He's being changed. He's being used as a statement." That last one circulated the fastest because it made the most sense to them. A Blue heir does not treat a penniless boy as an equal without reason, so they invented reasons. At one gathering, I caught part of a conversation near the staircase. "It's not just generosity," one relative said. "No," another agreed, "it's intentional. Like he's proving something. Or correcting something." A pause. Then the quietest voice: "Or replacing something." That one lingered longer than the rest. Meanwhile, Noah sat beside me, as none of it reached him directly, but I could tell it still landed in pieces. The way his eyes would flick toward laughter that stopped when he looked up. The way he'd go quiet when certain relatives entered a room. The way he still sometimes hesitated before sitting down, even when the seat was clearly his. He was learning the shape of the world he had been pulled into, and the world was not gentle about it. "You don't have to stay here," I told him once, low enough that only he could hear. He looked at me confused. Where would I go? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple: he didn't have anywhere else in my world. That was what made everyone uncomfortable, not that I included him, but I never treated him like he was separate. The Blue relatives escalated their commentary over time. "Noah's always there. He never leaves. It's like he's part of the household now." And yet, someone added bitterly, "He isn't." That contradiction became the center of everything they said. Noah without status but given access. Noah without wealth was given clothing. Noah without lineage was sitting beside the heir like distance no longer applied. And me, refusing to enforce the distance they expected. "He's going to misunderstand this," one relative warned me directly one afternoon. "Understand what?" I asked. "This arrangement." I looked at them for a long moment. "There's nothing to misunderstand," I said. But they didn't believe that, because in their world, equality was never neutral. It was always interpreted as something else. And in the background of all of it, Noah stayed the same person he had always been: quiet, gentle, trying not to take up too much space even when space was being given to him deliberately. Only now the world was watching him do it, and deciding what it meant. My father, Terrence, was the richest man in California and one of the most powerful men on the Pacific Coast. Before we moved to California in 1972, he had been the richest man in New York City. I was his heir. Because of that, I grew up surrounded by a level of wealth, influence, and privilege that most people could barely comprehend. I was as rich as Midas, and simply sitting beside me could change how people were perceived. Anyone associated with me gained a visibility that a penniless boy could never ordinarily have received. And then there was Noah. The way I elevated that little blonde boy was almost unheard of, even among wealthy, blue-blooded families. Everyone knew Noah was protected. No one was permitted to touch him, hurt him, threaten him, or deliberately target him. If someone mistreated Noah, they were immediately dismissed from wherever I was. It didn't matter who they were, how wealthy their family was, or how influential they believed themselves to be. The message was simple: Noah was under my protection. People wanted to be around me. I was wealthy, attractive, connected, and positioned close to extraordinary centers of power. Being welcomed into my world could open doors that would otherwise remain permanently closed. But those doors could just as easily close. Everyone understood that hurting the blonde boy sitting beside Terrence's heir came with consequences. Anyone who deliberately targeted Noah risked losing access to the very social and professional circles they desperately wanted to enter. Noah didn't have to earn that protection. He didn't have to be rich. He didn't have to come from a powerful family. He only had to sit beside me. And because he sat beside me, the world treated him differently. Looking back, I understood that my protection gave Noah privileges almost no other child could have received. I had the power to make people notice him, respect him, and fear the consequences of mistreating him. But that power also created something complicated. The world began to see Noah as someone who belonged within my sphere of influence. I saw him as someone I had sworn to protect. Those two things were never quite the same. Everyone in high society knew that Noah was financially supported by me. I spoiled him rotten, and when I turned 18, people learned that he had become my beneficiary. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on Noah every year. On his birthday alone, I could spend $10,000 on entertainment. His clothes could easily cost more than $200,000 a year. To me, though, it was barely a drop in the bucket compared with the wealth held in my trust. Money was never the point. If spending it made Noah happy, then I was happy. Noah would never have to work a day in his life if he didn't want to. He would never have to struggle financially, worry about a mortgage, or wonder whether he could afford the things he needed. Anything he genuinely wanted or needed would be provided for. People understood what that meant. The life attached to my name was the kind of life many people would have killed for. There were women who would have married me simply for access to that world, for the wealth, the influence, the connections, and the security that came with being associated with me. But Noah had access to all of it without ever asking for any of it. That was what made him different. He didn't want my money. He didn't want my influence. He didn't want my connections. He didn't want to stand beside me so he could rub shoulders with powerful people or gain access to a world that would otherwise have been closed to him. Noah wanted the life he already had with me. That was enough. His heart reminded me of the innocence of little Prince Arthur in The Sword in the Stone. He was sweet, kind, gentle, and extraordinarily lovable. There was something about him that seemed untouched by the calculations that surrounded my world. Everyone around me seemed to want something. They wanted my attention, my money, my influence, my connections, my approval. They wanted proximity to power because proximity to power could change their lives. Noah didn't. He was around me for the simplest reason imaginable. He loved me. Noah was pure of heart. And that was something almost nobody in my world had ever given me. They loved what my name could do for them. Noah loved me when there was nothing he needed from me. For someone who had spent his life surrounded by wealth and power, that kind of love was priceless. I couldn't buy Noah's loyalty. I couldn't buy the love he had given me so freely. But there was one thing I could repay him for: everything he had endured simply by staying beside me. Noah had spent his childhood beside me, protected from my horrible family, especially my father, Terrence, whose cruelty and abuse had made our home a frightening place. Noah had given me something money could never purchase. He had stayed when he didn't have to. He had been there when I needed someone. The money and gifts were how I expressed my gratitude, affection, and warmth toward him. After everything good Noah had given me and everything terrible he had helped me endure, spending $2,000 on a coat seemed almost meaningless. But people in Los Angeles misunderstood. Some believed Noah's mother had brought him to our house because she expected to gain something from his connection to my family. Others looked at Noah and assumed he was simply my bed warmer, someone I kept around because I could afford to. They couldn't have been more wrong. I didn't provide for Noah to keep him in my life. If Noah had been unhappy, if he had wanted to leave, or if he had wanted to live among people from his own social world, I would have let him go. Maybe when I was younger, I had believed that money could buy loyalty. Maybe I had once thought that giving someone enough could make them stay. Jay taught me otherwise. You cannot purchase someone's love. You cannot demand loyalty and call it affection. If you want someone to love you, you have to give them a reason to want you in their life. You have to treat them with respect. You have to be good to them. And even then, they still have the right to decide whether they want you. That was the lesson I eventually understood. Noah stayed because he wanted to stay. He loved me because he wanted to love me. And if he had ever decided that he no longer wanted that life, I would have had to accept it. So if people in high society misunderstood our relationship, if they looked at the money I spent on Noah and decided I was purchasing his company like some wealthy man buying the attention of a hustler, that was their problem. Rich people could misunderstand the money. They could misunderstand the gifts. They could misunderstand the privilege. But they couldn't change the truth. I hadn't bought Noah's love. I could never have afforded it. I was 11 when I tried to teach Noah how to skateboard. It was one of those afternoons that felt too bright for how clumsy we both were at the task, sun bouncing off the driveway, the rough sound of wheels rolling unevenly over cracks in the pavement. Noah stood a little stiff beside me, gripping the board as if it might suddenly decide to bite him. He was never naturally athletic, not in the way other kids seemed to be, but he never refused to try. That was always the difference with him. He'd attempt things anyway, even when his body clearly didn't know what to do. Okay, I said, stepping onto my own skateboard. Watch this first, you just have to commit. Commit to what? He asked, squinting at me like the concept itself was suspicious. To not fall, I said confidently. That doesn't sound real, he muttered. It is, I insisted, though I was already rolling forward. I tried to demonstrate a flip, something I'd seen older kids do, something I was absolutely not ready to replicate safely. For a second, it actually worked. The board lifted, rotated under me, and then everything stopped cooperating at once. My foot slipped, my balance went wrong, and I went down hard. I remember the impact more than the fall itself, the sudden jolt through my arm as I hit the edge of the tiled step leading up to the porch. The sound was sharp, wrong, like something snapping that wasn't supposed to. The skateboard clattered away across the concrete, still spinning for a second before it stopped. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the sky, trying to process what had just happened. Noah was beside me instantly. Hey, are you okay? He asked, voice rising with panic. He crouched down, hands hovering like he didn't know if touching me would make it worse. Did you hit your head? Can you move your arm? I tried. A wave of pain shot up immediately, making my breath catch. Okay, he said quickly, like he could fix it just by talking. Don't move it. My mom came out a few seconds later, alerted by the noise and Noah's voice more than anything else. The moment she saw my arm and the way I was holding myself still, her expression changed completely. Inside now, she said, already in motion. The drive to the ER felt too long and too short at the same time, like time was both rushing and dragging. I remember Noah sitting in the backseat with me, unusually quiet, watching my face like he was trying to memorize what pain looked like so he could recognize it later. You're not in trouble, he said suddenly. I blinked at him. What? For falling, he clarified like it was important to say out loud. You're not in trouble for it. I let out a small, breathy laugh that hurt more than it should have. That's not how injuries work. It kind of feels like it should be, he said. When we got to the hospital, everything became fluorescent lights and careful instructions. The doctors moved efficiently, talking to my mom in a language of calm professionalism while I tried not to focus on how much my arm hurt when it was repositioned. A break, a brace, ice, instructions. It wasn't the worst pain I'd ever felt, but it was enough that I stayed very still the whole time, focusing on anything other than the pressure in my arm. Noah stayed close the entire time, not loud, not in the way, just there. When it was finally done and the brace was on, I sat up a little slower than I wanted to, pretending I was fine. My mom was speaking to the nurse. The room was full of that post-procedure quiet. That's when I realized Noah was still watching me, not my arm, me. I looked away first. I'm fine, I said automatically. He didn't respond right away. Then quietly, you were shaking. I wasn't, I said too fast. He tilted his head slightly, unconvinced but not arguing. Okay. The problem was that he said it gently enough that it made it worse. My mom came back in a moment later, asking questions, signing papers, already shifting into logistics. No one really lingered on me as an emotional thing, just a medical one, but Noah stayed near my chair when we left. In the parking lot, as my mom went ahead to get the car, I finally looked at him again. "You can't tell anyone I cried," I said. His expression changed immediately, not mocking, not confused, just attentive, like this mattered to him in a way it didn't need to matter. "I didn't see that," he said. "You did." A pause. Then more firmly, "I won't tell anyone." I studied him for a second. "Promise?" He nodded. "Promise." I leaned back slightly, exhaling carefully through the part of my arm that still ached. "Good." Noah shifted his weight, glancing down at his shoes. "Does it still hurt a lot?" I hesitated, then shrugged with my good shoulder. "Not really." That wasn't fully true. He looked at me like he knew it. But he didn't push. Instead, he just stepped a little closer, close enough that his shoulder brushed mine lightly. "Okay," he said simply. And somehow that was enough for him to mean it. The reason I told Noah not to mention my crying to anyone wasn't really about embarrassment, it was about safety. My father didn't tolerate what he called emotional outbursts from his son. Not in public, not in private, not even in moments that most people would consider normal for a kid in pain or fear. Anything he labeled as too sensitive, too soft, or too feminine was treated like something that needed to be corrected. So I learned early how to hide it. Pain I could manage, injuries I could explain away, but crying felt different. It felt like something that would be noticed, remembered, and repeated back to me later in a way I wouldn't be able to control. So when I told Noah not to tell anyone, it wasn't really about pride. It was about consequences I didn't fully have words for yet. It was about keeping things from reaching the wrong ears. Noah looked at me in that quiet way he sometimes did when he knew something was bigger than what was being said out loud, even if he didn't understand all the reasons behind it. "Okay," he said softly. No questions, no teasing, no confusion pushed too far, just acceptance, and that more than anything is what made it feel safe, because Noah didn't treat it like a story worth repeating. He treated it like something that belonged to me. I remember talking to Noah about philosophy one afternoon when the air outside felt too still, like even the wind didn't want to interrupt us. We were lying in a meadow after a long bike ride, the same place where conversations always seemed to get heavier than they had any right to be at our age. Noah was picking at a loose thread on his sleeve while I talked, like he was listening with his hands as much as his ears. We had started with something simple, school, the future, college, but it always drifted somewhere else with us. It always did. "You really think it's all just good?" I asked him at one point, half challenging, half curious. Noah frowned slightly. "What do you mean good?" "All of it," I said, gesturing vaguely at the world like that explained anything. "People act like things are supposed to work out, like life is just moving forward toward something better." He tilted his head. "Isn't it?" That made me exhale a short laugh, not mean, just tired. "You're naive," I said, but without heat. Noah didn't get defensive, he rarely did. "I just don't think everything is already decided," he said after a moment. "That would be kind of scary." "It is decided," I said more quietly, like I was stating something I had learned instead of something I believed. "Not everything, but enough. By the time you understand it, you're already inside it." Noah looked at me more directly then. "Inside what?" I hesitated. The answer in my head was complicated, tangled in things I didn't fully have language for yet: family expectations, legacy, obligation, the feeling of being shaped before you ever get to choose your own form. "My family," I said finally, "they decide a lot more than they should." Noah shifted slightly closer, listening now in a different way. I kept going because once I started it was hard to stop. "They've always had plans," I said, "for everything, for who I'm supposed to become, what I'm supposed to do. It's not like I get a normal version of growing up." Noah was quiet for a second. "That sounds really heavy." "It's just how it is," I said. "No," he replied immediately, surprising me a little with the firmness in his voice. "That's not just how it is. that's people deciding things for you. I looked at him then. You say that like you can stop it. I don't know if you can stop all of it, he admitted, but I don't think that means you have to agree with it. That made me pause because Noah didn't talk like that often. He wasn't trying to sound smart. He just said what he felt was true. I leaned back on my hands, staring up at the sky for a moment. You don't understand how deep it goes, I said. It's not like I can just walk away from it. Everything is already set. Expectations roles what I'm supposed to be. Noah picked at the thread again, then spoke carefully, but you're still you. I let out a short breath. That doesn't change anything. It might, he said. I looked at him again. He met my gaze without flinching. You talk like the future is already written, he continued. But you're still making choices right now. You're choosing what you say. What do you do? Who do you sit next to? That's not the same thing, I said. It kind of is, he replied. I shook my head slightly. You're too optimistic. No, Noah said softly. I just don't like the idea that people don't get to matter in their own lives. That landed differently than I expected. For a moment, I didn't respond. The air between us filled with the usual background sounds, distant traffic, something moving in the trees, but the conversation felt like it had tightened around a single point. Noah shifted closer again, bumping my shoulder lightly with his. You always talk like you're already outside your life, he said, like you're watching it happen instead of living it. I frowned. That's not what I'm doing. It kind of is, he insisted, but gently, not accusing, just observing. I didn't answer right away because part of me didn't want to admit that he was right about anything. Noah leaned his head back, looking up at the same sky I was. I think college is going to change things, he said after a while. How? I asked. I don't know, he admitted, but I don't think we're going to stay the same people we are right now. I glanced at him. You really believe that? Yeah, he said simply, otherwise what's the point of going? That made me laugh again, quieter this time. You're still thinking everything has a point. No, he said, turning back to me, I think we made the point. That stayed with me longer than I expected, not because it solved anything, but because Noah said it like it was normal to believe. What I actually wanted when I stripped everything down to its simplest form wasn't anything grand or dramatic. It was just space to exist without being assigned a script. No expectations are layered on top of every decision. No constant recalibration of who I was supposed to become in someone else's imagination. No feeling like I was always being watched for signs that I was deviating from a path I never agreed to walk in the first place. I was tired of that kind of life, tired of being measured, tired of being corrected, tired of every conversation eventually circling back to what I should be doing instead of what I actually wanted. If I tried to imagine something different, something that didn't feel like pressure, it was never complicated. Just a place of my own, a quiet house not shaped by anyone else's expectations, a life that didn't feel like a performance, and Noah as a roommate in the simplest sense of the word, someone who exists in the same space without trying to define it for me, not someone I had to explain myself to, not someone who turned my thoughts into a project or a judgment, just a steady, familiar presence in the background of daily life, someone who understands silence without trying to fill it. That was what felt grounding about him. Not anything dramatic or symbolic, just that he didn't try to turn me into something else every time I spoke. My father, though, would never see it that way. To him, everything had structure, purpose, direction. Even relationships were supposed to serve something larger than themselves, reputation, legacy, or control. Anything that didn't fit into that framework wasn't just different, it was treated like a threat to order. So, anything I wanted that didn't align with that system automatically became something he would try to correct. Not always loudly, but firmly. And I knew that if I ever tried to build a life that looked like mine instead of his expectation of mine, it wouldn't be met with understanding. It would be met with resistance. But even knowing that, the thought didn't go away. It stayed, not as rebellion, just as clarity, because for once I didn't want to imagine a life built around becoming something. I wanted to imagine a life built around being allowed to stay the same person without having to justify it. I remember lying on the grass in the meadow after we had ridden our bikes. Noah asked me what I wanted to do with my life, and I told him exactly what my life was like. I went quiet after that, as I had finally said something that couldn't be taken back. I didn't look at myself right away. My eyes stayed fixed somewhere past my shoulder, like I was watching a version of the room that didn't include either of us. It wasn't dramatic when I spoke again, that was the worst part. There was no build-up, no cracking voice, no hesitation, just certainty. Don't ask, I said. Not really, they announce things, and then everyone around you rearranges reality so it feels like it was your idea in the first place. My hands wouldn't stay still, they never do when I talk about this. I tried to slow them, pressing them into my knees until the movement stopped. I've had my whole life scheduled out in conversations I wasn't invited to, I went on. Schools, degrees, internships, the right people to be seen with, the wrong people to avoid. I let out a short breath, something between a laugh and a dismissal. It sounded hollow even to me. Even the timing of things like relationships. I hesitated on the word, I shouldn't have said it. That's the kind of thing that gets noticed, picked apart, turned into another decision someone else makes for me. I shook my head slightly like I could take it back. It's all mapped out, I said more quietly, not in one place, not written down, just understood, expected. My fingers curled slightly against my knees again, restless energy creeping back in. And the worst part is, I added, staring at the floor now instead of him, if I follow it, everyone's happy. I paused. And if I don't, I let out another small breath, this one tighter, then suddenly I'm the problem. Relationships, he repeated, quieter, as if that's something I get to have, like it's a choice I can just make. For a second I forced myself to look at him directly. It wasn't soft, I didn't have it in me to soften it, but it wasn't cruel either, just tired. You think I'm choosing distance because I don't care, I said. But it's not that simple. I don't get to build a life around what I care about. I get to fit myself into whatever shape is already waiting for me. I shifted back, letting my weight rest against the edge behind me. Even holding myself upright felt like more effort than it should have. My family doesn't talk about love like it's something you feel, I went on. It's more like a transaction, a strategy, something that strengthens alliances, protects status, keeps things clean. The words sounded colder out loud than they did in my head, but they were true. That's how it's always been framed, not heart's contracts, not connection value. I let my gaze drift away from him again, jaw tightening slightly. So when you look at me like I'm pulling away for no reason, I added quietly, you're seeing a choice that I don't actually have. My fingers pressed harder against the surface beneath me, grounding, steadying. I'm not free enough to be reckless with something like that, I said. Not without it costing more than just me, and I've watched what happens when you don't cooperate, he said. It's not loud, it's not some dramatic punishment, it's just removal. You get cut out of decisions, you get corrected until you stop pushing back, or you get replaced entirely. I paused. For a second, something sharper slipped through frustration, not at him, not really, just at all of it, at how inevitable it always feels. I used to think I could just endure it, I admitted. Like I could take whatever path they put in front of me and still keep something for myself on the side, something private, something untouched. I shook my head once, small but enough to cut the thought off. That doesn't work, I said. Nothing stays untouched, not when people think they own your future. My gaze dropped to the floor between us. It was easier than looking at him, easier than seeing what this actually meant out loud. I tried, I added, quieter now. I thought if I kept it separate, if I was careful enough, it wouldn't bleed into everything else. My fingers flexed slightly, then stilled again. But it always does. I let out a slow breath, the tension settling heavier instead of leaving. They don't need to say anything directly, I went on. It's in the expectations, the timing, the way every decision somehow loops back to what they've already planned. Another small pause. And eventually, I said, voice flattening a little, you realize there isn't a version of your life that belongs only to you. And the worst part, I said more quietly, is that they're not even cruel about it. They think they're doing the right thing, that they're protecting me, building something stable, something respectable. A faint, bitter curve pulled at my mouth before I could stop it. As if stability is the same thing as freedom. The words hung there for a second, heavier than I meant them to be. I went quiet, rubbing my hands together again, slower this time, not trying to get rid of anything, just trying to feel something real, something that actually belonged to me. It's harder to push back against that, I added after a moment. If they were just openly controlling or cold about it, it'd be easier to call it what it is. My fingers dragged against my palms, a dull, grounding friction. But they frame it like care, I said, like everything's being done for me, not to me. I exhaled slowly, gaze unfocused somewhere past the floor. And that makes you second-guess yourself, I continued. Makes you wonder if wanting something different is just being ungrateful. My hand stilled again. After a while you stop trusting what you want, I said quietly, because it never lines up with what's already been decided. I don't know how to explain it in a way that makes sense outside of it, I said, because from the outside it probably looks like I have everything. Options, money, access, people who would do anything to be near me. My eyes flicked up to him for a second, sharp, searching, then away again. But none of that changes what I actually am in the system I'm in, I continued. It just makes it easier for other people to justify controlling it. I let out a slow breath, measured, like I could keep the next part contained if I was careful enough. It turns you into something useful, I said after a moment. Not a person, an asset, something to be managed, positioned. My jaw tightened slightly. And the better everything looks from the outside, the harder it is to argue against it, I went on, because who's going to believe there's a problem when all they can see is advantage? They don't see the trade-offs, I said quietly. They don't see what it costs to never actually choose anything for yourself. A brief pause. And after a while, I added, voice lower now, you stop expecting that you ever will. So when I say I can't be anything to you, I said, my voice steady even if everything underneath it wasn't, I don't mean I don't know what I feel. I mean I know exactly what happens if I let it become something more than what it is right now. The words sat heavy in my chest, but I didn't stop. It doesn't stay ours, I continued, quieter. It gets taken, or it gets punished, or it gets rewritten into something I don't even recognize anymore. I looked at him, then really looked this time, not avoiding it, not deflecting. There was no point in pretending this was anything less than what it was. I've seen how it plays out, I said. Maybe not this exact version, but close enough to know how it ends. My jaw tightened slightly, but I kept going. At first it's subtle, I went on. Comments, questions that aren't really questions. People are noticing things they weren't supposed to notice. And then suddenly it's not private anymore. It's a topic, a concern, something that needs to be handled. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. They won't come at it directly, I said. Not at first. They'll adjust everything around it instead. Schedules shift. Opportunities appear or disappear. You get steered gently, carefully toward something more acceptable, something that fits. My hands pressed together, fingers interlocking like I needed the pressure to keep myself grounded. And if that doesn't work, I paused just for a second, then it stops being gentle. I didn't elaborate, I didn't need to. My gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again, holding his. I can handle a lot, I said. I've been handling it my whole life, but this, I exhaled, slower this time, this isn't something they'd ignore, and it's not something they'd let exist on its own terms. There was a tightness in my chest now, something I couldn't quite push down. I don't just lose control of it, I added. I lose control of myself in it. Who am I in it, what it turns into? A small pause. And I don't think you deserve to be turned into something strategic, I said quietly, or hidden or explained away like you're a complication instead of what you actually are. My voice dipped slightly on the last part, but I didn't look away. I can't promise you a version of me that survives all of that, I said. Not intact, not honest, not something you'd still recognize as me. The honesty of it felt sharp but necessary. And I won't lie to you just to make this easier to sit in, I added. I won't pretend this could be simple when I know exactly how complicated it would become the second it stops being invisible. Silence pressed in for a moment after that. I held it even though part of me wanted to take something back, soften it, give him something less final, but I didn't. I wish I could, I said finally, quieter now, almost under my breath. I really do. My hands loosened slightly, the tension easing just a fraction but not leaving. Because if this were just about what I feel, I added after a beat, this wouldn't even be a question. I looked at him, something steadier settling in my expression, not softer but clearer, as I'd already accepted the shape of the answer even if I hated it. But it's not just mine to decide, I said, and that's the part I can't change. My chest felt hollow, like something inside me had been scooped out and left echoing. I hadn't meant to say it out loud. My existence makes me want to die sometimes, but once the words slipped free they just kept coming, like a crack in glass spreading faster than I could stop it. I stared somewhere past them, unfocused, because if I actually looked at Noah or worse at him, I knew I'd break. Or worse, I muttered, forcing out a dry, empty breath that didn't even resemble a laugh. It makes me sick. I'd give anything to be somebody else. And I meant it in a way that went deeper than just having a bad day or a bad mood. I meant peel myself out of this skin, step into another life, erase whatever's wrong with me at the source. Then Noah touched my face, and that almost made it worse. His hand was warm, grounding, real to real. It reminded me I was still here, still stuck inside myself. When he started crying, it felt like I'd done something unforgivable, like I'd taken whatever weight I carried and shoved it onto him without permission. His voice cracked as he spoke, desperate and soft at the same time, begging me to promise something I wasn't sure I deserved to promise. "If you ever want to kill yourself, tell me." His words wrapped around my ribs and squeezed. He said his world would be more joyless without me, and I didn't understand that. I didn't understand how someone could look at me, at everything I was, and think I added anything good to their life. "Okay," I sniffled, the word barely forming past the tightness in my throat. It felt like a lie and a truth at the same time. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to be the reason his voice sounded like that again, so I said it. I said okay because it was the only thing I could give him in that moment, even if I didn't fully believe in it myself. And then I looked at him, really looked this time. He seemed so steady compared to me, so normal, like the kind of person who could wake up and just live, breathe without overthinking it, exist without feeling like every second required effort. My jaw tightened before I even realized it, jealousy creeping in, sharp and ugly. "You're normal," I said, my voice low, almost bitter despite myself. "A person who could just live their life, enjoy it, be normal." The words tasted wrong as soon as they left my mouth, because some part of me knew I was simplifying him, reducing him into something easier to resent. But I couldn't stop the thoughts spiraling. What would that even feel like, to wake up and not feel like your own mind was working against you, to not constantly wish you could trade places with someone else? I tried to imagine it and came up empty every time. It was like trying to picture a color I'd never seen before. I swallowed hard, my gaze dropping because holding eye contact felt too exposing now. "I don't even know how to do that," I admitted quietly, more to myself than to either of them. "Just be okay." My hands curled slightly at my sides like I needed to hold onto something to keep from coming apart again. Noah was still close, still there, and that should have helped more than it did. Because the worst part, the part I didn't say, was that even with someone caring about me like that, even with him right there, I still felt wrong. Saying it out loud made it feel more solid than it had ever been in my head, like once the words existed in the air, I couldn't take them back even if I wanted to. I watched his face as I spoke, trying to stay steady, trying not to let anything slip through that would undo the point of what I was doing. Because the point wasn't to punish him, it wasn't even to reject him. It was containment. A kind of damage control I'd learned the hard way. If I defined the edges first, maybe nothing else could spill into places it didn't belong. "You deserve somebody who can give you what you need," I said, and I hated how reasonable it sounded. That was the worst part. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cruel, it was just final, like closing a door gently instead of slamming it. That's not me. When he turned toward me, confused, I felt the familiar pressure in my chest, the one that showed up whenever someone tried to look directly at me like I was more than a set of limitations. "What are you talking about?" he asked, and I almost wished I had a clearer answer. Something clean, something that didn't make everything more complicated than it already was. I gave him the truth as I understood it, piece by piece, because I couldn't afford to soften it. "I can't be your friend, I can't be your boyfriend, I can't be your brother, I can't be your mentor, I can't be your buddy." Each sentence landed heavier than the last, not because I wanted them to hurt him, but because I needed him to understand there wasn't a version of me that fit into those roles without breaking something in the process. I wasn't listing what I didn't want to be, I was numbing what I couldn't sustain. I paused after that, my breath uneven in a way I refused to acknowledge. "I know I like you," I added quietly, because honesty had already gone too far to stop now. "You make me feel safe, and we share our lives with each other." My eyes flicked to him for a second, then away again just as fast. That part was harder than the rejection, that part made everything less simple. "But I can't give you anything else." A humorless sound slipped out of me before I could stop it. It wasn't even a laugh, just air escaping pressure. "I'm not saying you want anything else," I clarified, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. People always wanted something eventually. That was the pattern I'd learned to expect. But if there ever comes a day when you do, don't look for any of that in me. My hands moved without thinking, rubbing together slowly like I could erase the feeling of being seen too clearly. I didn't like how exposed I felt saying it. I didn't like that I even had to explain it. I only hurt people, I continued, voice flattening again because softness made it harder to hold the line. I'm not compatible with whatever people want from me. It wasn't self-pity, it was inventory, a list of outcomes I'd watched repeat enough times to stop questioning them. I see the way people look at me, I went on. They want my body, my connections, my money, my life, my status. Nobody wants me for anything else. I swallowed, jaw tightening. There's nothing beyond those things within me they could want. The last part came out quieter, almost buried, and even if they did, I'm not free to accept it anyway. And as soon as I said that, I realized how absolute it sounded, as if I'd already decided the ending of a story I was still living inside. I let the silence sit for a while after that, mostly because anything I added felt like it would just make it heavier. The sky above us looked indifferent in a way I envied. No expectations, no attention, no one trying to extract meaning from it. I kept my arms folded behind my head, staring up instead of at him, because looking at him made everything I was saying feel too sharp. Being rich is a curse, I said again, quieter this time, like repeating it might make it more understandable. It didn't matter how many people called it privilege or freedom or opportunity. From where I stood, it always ended the same way. People think money fixes everything, but it doesn't. It poisons everything. I pulled at a blade of grass between my fingers without really noticing I was doing it, something to keep my hands busy. Something to keep me from thinking too hard about the fact that I couldn't actually escape any of this. It changes how people look at you, I continued. How they treat you, they stop seeing you as a person. I swallowed, jaw tightening slightly as I glanced toward him again. He was still there, still listening. Still not getting up and walking away. That in itself didn't make sense to me. Most people would have taken the exit by now. And maybe I'm selfish for letting you stay near that poison. That was the part I meant more than anything else, because I could tolerate being the thing people wanted for the wrong reasons. I'd built my life around it, but watching someone get pulled into it because of proximity, that was different. That felt like something I should prevent, not allow. If I were a good man, I said, and the words tasted unfamiliar even as I said them, I'd leave you alone, I'd make you leave me alone. My fingers tightened behind my head, tension building in my shoulders. But I'm not a good man. A small shake of my head followed, almost automatic, not dramatic, just honest in a way I didn't like admitting out loud. I would give anything to be invisible, just a regular guy nobody notices. Because invisibility to me didn't mean loneliness, it meant safety. It meant not being evaluated every time I walked into a room. It meant not wondering what people were calculating when they looked at me. There was a long pause after that, the kind that stretches out until it starts to feel like it might never end. I exhaled slowly, letting my arms relax slightly, still staring at the sky. I'm tired of people pursuing me like I'm a piece of meat, I added flatly, the exhaustion bleeding through more than I intended. It wasn't anger anymore. It was just worn-down repetition. The same pattern over and over until it stopped surprising me. Then I rolled slightly onto my side again, shifting just enough to look at him properly without fully committing to it. My voice softened, almost reluctantly. You're lucky, I said after a moment. And I meant it in a way I didn't fully know how to explain yet. Tate stayed bent forward for a moment longer than necessary, like he was waiting for his body to stop betraying him before he had to rejoin the conversation. His hand pressed briefly against the ground for balance, fingers curling into the grass as if anchoring himself to something real. When Noah's hand landed on his back, Tate didn't flinch away, but he didn't lean into it either. It was a careful neutrality, like he was deciding how much of himself to allow back into the moment. I'm fine, he repeated, quieter this time, though it sounded less like reassurance and more like dismissal. He straightened slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand before sitting back on his heels. His breathing was uneven, but he worked to steady it, jaw tightening as if sheer willpower could force his body into compliance. The meadow around them felt too open, too exposed. Tate hated that. Open space meant no control over what came next, no walls to manage distance or reactions. He kept his voice still even when he spoke again, cutting through the tension Noah was holding so carefully. Because you get to choose who you love, Tate said, picking up where he left off as if nothing had happened, like his body hadn't just betrayed the entire point he was trying to make. You get to decide who you want to be with. His expression tightened, eyes narrowing slightly as he stared off toward nothing in particular. That alone puts you in a different world than me. He leaned back on his hands, posture shifting into something more controlled now that he had himself under rein again. Not relaxed, never relaxed, but composed in a way that kept things at arm's length. The act of loving or falling in love, he continued slowly, each word weighed before it left him, it makes me want to puke. He said it flatly, like it was a medical fact rather than a feeling, like distance made it safer to admit. His jaw flexed once after the words landed, irritation flickering not at Noah, but at himself for having to explain something that felt fundamentally unexplainable. Noah's reaction came quickly, carefully, trying to stay steady on ground that kept shifting under them. Tate heard him, of course he did, he always heard everything. The question "what do you mean" landed softly, but it still pulled something tight in his chest. Tate let out a short, humorless breath, dragging a hand through his hair again, more out of habit than comfort. "It's not romantic," he said, tone sharpening slightly now as if pushing against the idea itself. "It's not soft or beautiful or whatever people pretend it is." His eyes flicked toward Noah briefly, then away again. "It's possession, it's a dependency, it's people losing their edges until they don't recognize themselves anymore." He exhaled through his nose, shoulders tightening. "I've seen what it does," he added, voice lower now. "I've lived it, and it always ends the same way: someone breaks or someone gets owned by it, or both." Noah's voice came quieter after that, but steadier than Tate expected. That steadiness always irritated him a little, not because it was wrong, but because it didn't match the world as Tate experienced it. Noah leaned forward slightly, studying him like he was trying to translate something complicated and failing to look away even when it hurt. "You say that," Noah said softly, "but you're the most intense person I know when it comes to caring about someone. You don't do anything halfway, you don't know how to." Tate's mouth tightened at that, something defensive flickering behind his eyes. He didn't like being read like that, didn't like being made visible in ways he hadn't approved. Intensity wasn't softness. Intensity was controlled under pressure. That was different. Noah hesitated, then pushed a little further, voice gentler but still direct. "Have you ever been in love?" The question barely landed before Tate's body reacted on its own. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a shift, a sudden internal snap, like something locking and unlocking at the same time. His stomach tightened sharply and he turned away too fast, one hand bracing against the ground as he leaned forward into the grass. The sound that came out of him wasn't controlled. It wasn't something he could shape into dignity or distance. Noah moved immediately, but Tate was already past the point of stopping it cleanly. He retched once, then again, the tension in his shoulders shaking as his body forced everything out that his words hadn't been able to contain. It wasn't about weakness, it was reaction overload, the body refusing what the mind kept trying to frame as philosophy. When it passed, Tate stayed there a second, breathing hard, eyes unfocused. Noah's hand was still on his back, grounding but not pushing. Tate noticed that, filed it away, didn't acknowledge it. "I'm not," Tate started, then cut himself off, swallowing hard and sitting up again more carefully this time. His voice came out rougher than before, but still controlled. "Don't do that." It wasn't anger, it was an instruction. He wiped his mouth again, then finally looked at Noah fully, expression sharper now, not cruel but firm in a way that didn't invite argument. "Don't ask questions like that if you don't want honest answers," he said, "and don't expect them to come out clean." A pause, longer this time, his breathing finally evened out. Then, quieter but still steady, Tate added, "I don't need you analyzing me, I need you to understand the boundary I'm setting." Tate went quiet for a moment after speaking, like he was weighing whether continuing was worth the effort it took out of him. The air between them felt tighter now, not from anger, but from the way truth tended to shrink the space people could comfortably stand in. Eventually he turned his head again and looked at Noah properly, no avoidance this time, no half-directional gaze, just direct, deliberate focus. "That will never be me," Tate said, voice steady in a way that wasn't soft but controlled. "And I'm not saying you want that, I'm saying if you ever do, don't waste your life on me." His jaw tightened slightly, like he could already feel the weight of the words and didn't like carrying them. "Time won't change my choice to never love you." There was a pause and something flickered behind his eyes, something like frustration but not aimed outward, more like he was arguing with an outcome he didn't have the authority to change. "I can't choose my life the way you think people do," he continued, "not in the ways that matter." He shifted where he sat, pulling one knee closer to his chest, gaze dropping for a second before lifting again. "People like me don't get to build normal lives from the inside out," he said more quietly. "It's structured from the outside in, expectations, arrangements, obligations. everything already decided before you even realize you're supposed to agree with it. His fingers flexed once against his own arm, grounding himself. And before you start thinking that means I'm exaggerating, don't. It doesn't matter what I feel about it. It still happens the same way. Tate exhaled slowly through his nose, gaze drifting back toward the open field, as if looking at it made the idea of escape feel temporarily more distant. You deserve better, he said after a moment, voice flattening again into something more final. Stay as far away from people like me as you can, Noah, not because I'm dangerous in some dramatic way, because proximity changes things, it always does. He swallowed, then added more firmly, and I'm not special in that, I'm just the version of it you can see clearly. A longer pause followed, the kind that didn't ask for interruption. The only real way out of this kind of world, Tate continued, is distance or independence, money, stability, something that makes you less reachable. His eyes flicked back to Noah again, sharper now, not unkind but insistent. Otherwise, you're always inside someone else's system, someone else's decisions, someone else's rules. He let out a slow breath and leaned back slightly, tension still visible in his shoulders even as his voice lowered. I'm telling you this because I don't want you learning it late, he said, not because I think you'll listen. Tate didn't think of it in the language other people used for closeness. Not back then, not when everything was still being learned through a house that felt like rules stacked on top of silence. Noah had always been there in a way that didn't demand explanation. That was the part Tate never questioned. It wasn't framed as love or even something that needed numbing. It was just relief, a steady presence that made the edges of everything else less sharp. When Tate was younger, he didn't have the vocabulary for comfort the way other kids might have. He only had patterns, what felt safe, what didn't, what made the house quieter inside his head for a while. Noah fit into the first category without effort. There were moments Tate remembered without fully understanding why they stayed with him, sitting too close on a couch that wasn't big enough for two people to be distant, falling asleep in the same room without anyone insisting that they separate. The casual way Noah would lean into him like it was nothing, like proximity wasn't something to be negotiated or earned. At the time, Tate didn't analyze it. He just registered the effect. His body stopped bracing. His thoughts slowed down. The constant internal tension loosened in small increments he didn't know how to name. He compared it later in ways he didn't say out loud to something older. Something from a different life he barely allowed himself to think about directly. There had been someone before Noah, someone whose presence carried a different kind of calm, more structured, more defined. But even that comparison stayed locked inside his head, never spoken into anything that could be questioned. With Noah, it wasn't about understanding what it meant. It was about what it did, and what it did was make him feel less alone inside himself. Tate had grown up in a house where closeness wasn't simple. It came with rules, expectations, and unspoken consequences. His father's voice was always somewhere in the architecture of it all, especially when it came to proximity, to influence, to the idea of being shaped by someone else. So Tate learned early how to compartmentalize, how to separate what he felt from what he was allowed to recognize, how to let something matter without letting it become something that could be examined too closely. Noah never needed permission in the way other people did. That was part of the danger, though Tate wouldn't have called it that at the time. It was just easier. Too easy, maybe, the kind of ease that made you stop noticing where the boundaries were supposed to be. Tate kept it in the safest category he had, platonic, familiar, necessary even. He didn't question the way Noah's presence settled him, the way physical closeness sometimes felt like breathing room instead of intrusion. He didn't assign meaning to the way he noticed when Noah wasn't there, or the way he instinctively moved closer when he was. Those things stayed unspoken because numbing them would have required admitting they existed in the first place. And admitting that meant risking everything becoming something it wasn't allowed to become. Tate kept it contained the only way he knew how, by refusing to categorize it beyond what felt acceptable, by telling himself it was just comfort, just habit, just history. Not love, not anything that complicated, just Noah. Tate didn't try to defend the version of himself that other people might have judged on paper. He knew what he'd done, what he'd been shaped into, and what parts of him had been survival before they were ever choice. Some of it sat in him like residue you couldn't fully wash out. Some of it he didn't even try to justify anymore. But Noah had always been different, Tate was. Sentimental about Noah, Tate would have allowed himself to say out loud, not at the time, how he really felt. It wasn't framed as something tender or named in any soft language. It was simpler than that. Noah was one of the few things in his life that didn't feel like it came with conditions attached, and in a house where everything had conditions, friendships, access, even approval, that mattered more than he could easily explain. He wasn't proud of the ways he'd had to navigate that world. The negotiations, the quiet compromises, the things he agreed to just to keep certain doors from closing, a lot of it blurred together now, remembered more as pressure than detail. But Noah had been the one thing he refused to let become negotiable. Even when everything else was, he didn't always have the language for why. If someone had asked him then, he would have said something reduced and careful, something like he's important or he's just my friend, because anything beyond that would have felt too exposed, too easy to take away. But underneath that restraint there was a consistent line he never crossed: Noah was not disposable. That was the distinction Tate lived by, even if he didn't articulate it in those exact terms at the time. He might have been hardened in other ways, learned to detach, to compartmentalize, to treat certain interactions as transactions because that was what his environment rewarded, but Noah didn't fall into that category. Not even close. If anything, Tate bent in the opposite direction with him. He watched more carefully, stayed longer, paid attention in ways he didn't give most people access to, not because he was trying to possess anything, but because he was trying to keep something intact in a life that constantly tried to strip things down to usefulness. The world around him didn't see Noah the way he did. That much was obvious even then. People sorted others quickly in his environment by status, by usefulness, by proximity to power, and Noah in their eyes would have been easy to overlook or underestimate. Tate noticed that early. He noticed the way dismissal worked in rooms like that, and something in him resisted it, not loudly, not openly, but consistently. He found ways, small practical ways, to keep Noah near without making it obvious that he was intervening at all. To make sure Noah stayed in spaces where he could still be himself, instead of being reshaped into something colder or more transactional. It wasn't framed in his mind as protection in any dramatic sense. It was just a refusal. Refusal to let the system around him define that one connection the way it defined everything else. Even when that system was his own home. Even when the pressure came from his father's expectations, which were always less about affection and more about control, image, and alignment with what was considered acceptable. Tate learned early that friendship was something that could be restricted if you weren't careful. That access to people could be treated like leverage. So, he became careful. Strategic in the way he navigated proximity, careful about what he revealed, careful about what he allowed to be seen as important. But Noah slipped through those categories anyway. Not because Tate ignored the rules, but because he made a different rule for that one person and never said it out loud. Looking back, he could recognize the contradictions more clearly. The version of himself that had absorbed parts of his environment without fully agreeing with them. The parts that were shaped by a harsh household, by warped ideas about hierarchy and control, by emotional survival mechanisms that weren't clean or admirable. But even within all of that, one thing stayed consistent. He didn't treat Noah like he was replaceable. Not then, not ever. And if there were things he did, things he agreed to, things he endured, things he said yes to just to preserve space in a life that constantly tried to narrow it, that wasn't because Noah was unimportant. It was because, in a world where almost everything could be taken or traded or rewritten, Tate had decided without ever announcing it that Noah wouldn't be one of those things. I grew up thinking my life had already been outlined for me, quietly arranged into something clean, controlled, and acceptable. I was supposed to follow my father's expectations, keep the right kind of connections, and become someone who never questioned the shape of the world I inherited. Friendship wasn't meant to be personal, it was supposed to be strategic, measured, and useful. Then Noah happened. He didn't fit into any of the categories I'd been taught to use. He wasn't leverageable and he wasn't replaceable. He was just there, steady, kind, and constant in a way my life had never been. I didn't know how to name what that did to me, only that it made everything I thought was settled feel unstable. I tried to keep things contained, to follow the rules I'd been given while still keeping him close. But the truth is, I didn't know how to manage something that mattered that much without letting it change me. He wasn't thinking in labels, not the way other people insisted on doing, but in patterns, in cause and effect, in what things actually did to him versus what they were called. There were always assumptions people made about him, about attachment, about sex, about meaning. He'd never found those assumptions particularly useful. They flattened things that were, in his experience, more complicated than they needed to be. He let out a slow breath, staring at nothing in particular as he sorted it into something he could finally articulate without it becoming distorted. If anyone asked him to define himself, he would have corrected them immediately. Not straight, not gay, not interested in reducing it to something that neat. Labels belong to people who needed structure to understand themselves. Tate had always operated more on function than identity. He didn't think in terms of categories so much as outcomes, what something meant in practice, not in theory. Sex in that framework wasn't a declaration or a story. It wasn't romance and it wasn't identity. It was physical. Sometimes it was control. Sometimes it was a way of reclaiming something internal that felt compromised. It never carried the weight that other people assigned to it after the fact. And even that truth felt secondary compared to everything else sitting underneath it. Because when he thought back honestly, there had only ever been one person who disrupted that distance in a way he couldn't neatly file away. Noah. The name surfaced without ceremony in his mind, not as an idea but as a constant. Not something he had to interpret, but something that simply existed in the background of his life for as long as he could remember. He didn't think of it as romance. He didn't think of it as anything that needed permission or explanation. It was just presence, shared space, shared time, shared quiet that never required performance. He remembered it in fragments more than scenes, sitting too close without it being questioned, falling asleep in the same room and waking up without the world demanding it meant more than it did. The ease of proximity didn't require negotiation. It had always felt less like an event and more like continuity, something that simply was. He exhaled again, jaw tightening slightly as he tried to pin down what people would misunderstand if he said it wrong. Because they always did. They always tried to turn simplicity into narrative, attachment into romance, comfort into intention. But what he knew, what he had always known was simpler than that. He hadn't been thinking in terms of future, label, or ownership. He had just liked him, not as a concept, not as a role, not as something to define or defend, just as the one person who stayed close enough that existence didn't feel like something he had to endure alone. Tate didn't think of it as manipulation at the time, not in the way people outside would label it. In his mind, it was more like a structure, a system of exchange that made an otherwise unstable life feel predictable. His father set the terms early even if they were never spoken in a soft or comforting way. Approval wasn't given freely, it was negotiated through performance. Be perfect and you keep what matters. Slip and things could be taken away without warning. For Tate, that what matters narrowed down to one thing he never said out loud in the way it deserved to be said: Noah. It wasn't framed as love, not then, not in any language he would have allowed himself to use honestly. It was framed as a necessity, as a habit, as something closer to comfort than emotion. But the truth underneath it was simpler and more dangerous than he admitted. Noah being allowed to stay, allowed to be near Tate, was conditional. His father didn't see Noah as equal company. He saw him as a proximity that needed justification. Something that could be permitted under the right circumstances. If Tate remained controlled, compliant, and useful enough to justify exceptions, Terrence would allow a variable if it controlled his son. Tate learned what compliance really meant. He learned that perfection wasn't just about grades or behavior or reputation. It was a currency, one he could spend to negotiate access to the only kind of closeness that made his life feel survivable. If he was good enough, disciplined enough, predictable enough, aligned enough with what his father wanted, then Noah could be allowed closer. Not as a privilege, but as a controlled allowance. Sometimes it meant Noah being allowed into their home without questions. Sometimes it meant permission for him to stay over. And in the rare moments Tate understood as conditional mercy rather than normality, it meant Noah being allowed to sleep there at all. Even that was framed in restrictions Tate didn't question openly. Boundaries, expectations, and oversight that always reminded him that the permission was temporary and could be revoked at any time. So Tate complied. He became what was asked of him in public: perfect student, perfect son, perfect heir in training. He minimized mistakes, avoided conflict, and learned how to anticipate his father's moods before they turned into consequences. He shaped himself into something stable enough that nothing around him had to be adjusted too aggressively. And in return, he was allowed small continuities. Noah could stay, Noah could be in the house. Noah could exist in the same space without being treated like an intrusion. That was the bargain, unspoken but understood. Tate never described it as emotional involvement because he wasn't allowed to frame it that way, not in his own mind, not under the rules he was living inside. He told himself it was simply a practical arrangement. If he behaved correctly, the environment stayed stable and Noah remained within reach. And for a long time, he kept that system intact. 4 years of carefully maintained equilibrium. 4 years of being what he was expected to be externally, while quietly preserving the one thing that made it bearable internally. Noah became the center of that stability without ever being named as such. Tate didn't allow himself to think of it as an attachment. He called it comfort instead, something easier to justify, something that didn't threaten the structure he was forced to live within. But privately, in the unspoken parts of his life, the truth was harder to avoid. Noah wasn't just a presence he tolerated or benefited from. He was the reason the performance mattered in the first place. Tate had heard Terrence say it enough times that the words stopped sounding new, even when they still irritated something in him. Noah mooched off the Blue family. It was always phrased like that, casual, almost amused, like Noah was some kind of stray that had been taken in out of obligation rather than choice. Like he was excess, like he consumed something he hadn't earned. Tate never corrected him out loud, not because he agreed, but because correcting Terrence rarely changed anything except the temperature of the room. Still, internally, he knew exactly what was wrong with that framing. Noah didn't take from the Blue family in the way Terrence implied. He didn't drain resources or live beyond what was reasonable or exist as some kind of passive burden on Tate's household. That idea didn't survive even basic scrutiny when Tate actually looked at the numbers, the structure, the reality of how things were set up. Tate had a trust fund, not symbolic money, not theoretical wealth, actual structured support and dispersed annually, tied to conditions and age milestones. Until 18, it functioned as a controlled allowance from an estate that would later become fully accessible in parts. It was designed to teach responsibility through limitation while still ensuring long-term stability. And Tate used it. He used it for everything people around him liked to pretend came from generosity alone. Clothing, food, transportation. The small, everyday costs that made up actual living. If Noah was present in any of those spaces, if he ate at their table, stayed in their home, wore something Tate had insisted he take, it wasn't a drain on the family system. It was accounted for, quietly, automatically, reimbursed through the same structure that governed Tate's own consumption. Even if no one else acknowledged it, Tate did, because in his mind it mattered that things remained accurate. Noah wasn't an exception to a system that only benefited him. He wasn't a guest being carried. He wasn't a dependent in the way Terrence liked to imply, half joking and half judgmental. He was just there, and the difference to Tate was not trivial. Noah didn't feel like depletion. He didn't feel like something being taken away or consumed past its limit. If anything, the presence he brought into Tate's life was the opposite of that narrative. It didn't subtract, it expanded. That was the part Tate never had language for when other people tried to reduce it. Because what Terrence called mooching, Tate experienced as something closer to saturation concerning Noah, like light filling a space that had previously been too empty. Not overwhelming, not invasive, just present in a way that changed how everything else looked. Terrence didn't see that, or maybe he did and simply didn't categorize it the same way. He preferred simpler interpretations, hierarchy, ownership, and cost. People either contributed or they didn't. They either justified their presence or they didn't. Tate never fully bought into that framework when it came to Noah. There was a difference in his mind between consumption and coexistence, between someone taking from a system and someone existing within it without diminishing it. Noah didn't diminish anything. If anything, he changed the atmosphere of the house in ways Tate noticed more than he ever admitted. Not in loud ways, not in disruptions or intrusions, in quieter ones, the kind that showed up in how rooms felt less rigid when he was in them, how time didn't feel as tightly wound, how Tate himself stopped feeling constantly monitored from every angle when Noah was nearby. It wasn't something he would have described as gratitude back then. Gratitude implied acknowledgement of dependency, and Tate didn't frame it that way. It was more like a correction. Like something in the environment had been slightly misaligned before and Noah's presence adjusted it without effort. So, when Terrence called it mooching, Tate understood what he meant in terms of surface logic. He understood the language of it, the assumption of imbalance, the implication of burden, the social shorthand for this person is being supported beyond their worth. But it didn't map onto his reality, because Tate had never experienced Noah as a cost. He experienced Noah as continuity. And in a life where almost everything came with a price tag, emotional, social, financial, or reputational, that difference mattered more than he could easily explain. Still, he kept that conclusion mostly to himself, not because he doubted it, but because he knew people like Terence didn't actually want corrections, they wanted categories, and Noah, in Tate's mind, never fit cleanly into any of them. Tate didn't frame it as responsibility in the way Terence tried to impose it on him. Terence liked systems that were clean and hierarchical, where every presence had a cost center and every interaction could be translated into accountability. So he made it explicit in the way he did everything he wanted control over. If Noah was going to be in Tate's space, then Tate would be the one responsible for it. Not just socially but financially, behaviorally, structurally, with everything required to provide for the blonde. That included things Noah himself never thought about in transactional terms. Meals are eaten at the table, time spent in their house, clothing that ended up being worn because it was practical or necessary in the moment. Even the smallest incidental expenses of daily life were folded into a broader accounting system that Terence insisted Tate maintain. Every dime, every usage, every assumed burden was tracked back to Tate's allowance, his trust fund, his yearly stipend, quietly reconciled as if presence itself required justification. And Tate, for all the pressure of it, didn't react the way Terence expected him to. Tate didn't resent Noah for it. He didn't treat the blonde like a liability. If anything, he accepted the structure externally while refusing to let it define how he experienced Noah internally. The reimbursement system existed in one part of his life, mechanical and detached, like an administrative process he had to maintain, but it didn't touch the way he actually felt about Noah being there. Because what Terence called cost, Tate experienced as something else entirely: presence, noise in a house that otherwise felt too controlled, a second voice in rooms that would otherwise fall into silence that wasn't peaceful, just empty. Someone who didn't behave as if every interaction had to be weighed for advantage or consequence. Someone who could sit across from him and exist without turning the moment into negotiation. Tate provided for Noah's financial, emotional, and practical needs from the moment he brought the little blonde rascal home from kindergarten. Doctor visits, restaurant dinners, clothes, school supplies, transportation, toys, and eventually access to the best colleges. Tate quietly made sure that Noah had whatever he needed. But Tate never wanted Noah to feel indebted to him. After paying for something Noah wanted or needed, Tate didn't expect gratitude, repayment, or even recognition. He certainly didn't want Noah to stay in his life because of the comfortable life Tate provided. Tate wanted Noah to stay because Noah genuinely wanted him there. That distinction mattered more to Tate than the money ever could. He wasn't trying to remove every obstacle from Noah's life so Noah would owe him something. He wanted to remove the bumps, hiccups, and unnecessary hardships that might keep Noah from pursuing the things that made him happy. If Tate could make Noah's life a little easier, he considered that privilege enough. And beneath all of it was a much simpler, more vulnerable desire. Tate desperately wanted Noah to choose him back. Tate loved Noah deeply. For many years, that love was entirely platonic, but it was no less profound for being so. Noah mattered to him in a way that money could never measure. When Noah's mother couldn't or wouldn't give the little blonde boy everything Tate believed he deserved, Tate made a decision of his own. If the world wasn't going to make sure Noah was cared for, Tate would. Because in Tate's eyes, nobody deserved better than Noah. Tate liked having that, more than he would ever say aloud. The idea that Noah was expensive in the way Terence meant it didn't register as meaningful to him because Tate's internal valuation system wasn't built on the same assumptions. He wasn't calculating whether Noah was worth the cost of his own resources. He was registering something simpler, that the space felt different when Noah was there and worse when he wasn't. That was the part he never negotiated away. Terence could insist on accountability, could attach numbers to presence, could reduce every shared moment into a ledger of consumption and reimbursement, but none of that changed the fact that Tate actively preferred the imbalance. Because to him, it wasn't an imbalance at all. It was an improvement. If Noah wasn't in the house, the atmosphere changed in ways Tate didn't like sitting with for long. The rooms felt more rigid. The quiet became heavier, not restful. The structure of his day reverted back to something sharper, more controlled, more aligned with expectation and surveillance. And Tate, despite everything he had been trained to tolerate, never adapted well to that absence. He didn't call it need, not then, he wouldn't have used that word, but he noticed in a way that was impossible to ignore that his patience shortened when Noah wasn't around. His focus scattered more easily. The house felt less like somewhere he lived and more like somewhere he was being maintained. So, when Noah was there, when he was sitting at the table, moving through the house, speaking in ways that weren't filtered through obligation or performance state, didn't evaluate it as a transaction. He experienced it as a correction again, like something in the environment finally aligned in a way that made it easier to exist inside it. Terrence could attach all the financial language he wanted to it. He could insist on ownership of responsibility, on cost accounting, on the idea that Tate was paying for Noah's presence in some meaningful sense. But Tate never internalized that framing in the way Terrence intended, because what he actually registered was far simpler and far more difficult to reduce. When Noah was there, Tate didn't feel like he had to endure his own life as much. And when he wasn't, everything else became harder to tolerate in ways no ledger could ever capture. Tate had heard the way Terrence talked about Noah enough times to recognize the pattern behind it. Guest, dependent, extra cost, words chosen carefully to keep the hierarchy intact, to make sure everyone in the house understood where things stood in the family structure Terrence preferred. But Tate never experienced Noah through that lens, not even close. In the day-to-day reality of the house, Noah didn't feel like an intrusion or an obligation or a tolerated presence. He felt integrated, effortlessly so, the kind of person who didn't disrupt space so much as adjust to it. He was neat without being rigid, attentive without being performative, present without demanding attention, no half-finished mess that someone else would have to clean up later. If anything, he moved in a helpful way.